Hey, it's Ray Steele. Hope you like this, and please hit the subscribe button. Appreciate it. You can't hardly tell because of the way the Zoom camera does color, but Abdul, I wore my Tufts blue shirt in honor of Mike Braun. Mike Braun in his ubiquitous blue shirt. Tufts blue, that is. So I guess he's putting them back on because, Abdul, you reported this week that the senator is in all likelihood going to announce a run for governor, possibly after the midterms.
Yes, and I believe that he is going to run because normally when I post something like that, if I'm wrong or the facts are inaccurate, I'll usually hear immediately right away from the campaign. But when I hear dead silence and crickets, that's when I know I'm onto something. And I haven't heard anything yet from the Mike Braun campaign telling me I was incorrect. No, I wrote in my cheat sheet newsletter, most recent edition, that Mike Braun had been calling county chairman, let him know he was going to run for governor. I had that confirmed. This week was why I wrote the story. Mike Braun has never been happy in the Senate because he's always been more of a sort of an executive branch kind of guy because he's CEO of his company. So it doesn't surprise me that he's sort of tired of Washington D.C. Nothing really getting done. And also, thing too, Mike Braun said he would. So Mitch McConnell would probably stay if Republicans kept the majority. And it probably does look like it's going to happen. So I'm not surprised that he's running for governor.
Well, Ali, if this is true, and if this does happen, it sets up what could be an interesting primary season for Republicans, which I guess we should expect since Governor Holcomb is term limited. A lot of big names probably want that office. We've heard that Trey Hollingsworth, who is about to leave Congress, is perhaps interested. There's already one announced candidate. What do Republicans think about having choices like that, having to make the decision between a lot of big names who have held major positions in Washington already?
Yeah, I think it will be an interesting primary season. As you mentioned, we have one announced candidate, Eric Doden. I think having more choices at the table is just going to mean that we come out with a better candidate in the end. If Senator Braun chooses to announce his run for governor, I think we'll see a ramp up in interest from other potential candidates as the field starts to populate. So I think in the end, that just means for us that we have more great candidates to choose from, and we're going to come out with somebody that's going to be a really good option for the state.
So, Arielle, you have any news to break as to which Democrats are running?
No news there. I cannot even think forward to 2024 yet. I'm trying to get through these midterms right now and think forward to our municipals that are coming up. So, I mean, it's good to see that people are thinking, ahead to 2024. It's going to be here before we know it. But right now, I'm just like, let's get through these next, 19 days till early voting?
I'll throw in a Democratic name and save Arielle the grief and hassle. Jennifer McCormick, former superintendent of public instruction, one statewide office she was a Democrat, then turned Republican, then back to being a Democrat again. I would not be surprised to see Jennifer McCormick running for governor in 2024.
Back to the Republicans briefly. Mike Braun running, does this mean that Todd Rokita probably isn't? Because I think the thinking has been that the attorney general wanted to be governor next, but that would seem to be a big road to hoe for Mr. Rokita if you have a Mike Braun in that race.
Yeah, because I know Todd and his ego. His ego is almost as big as mine. He wouldn't want to lose twice to the same person. What I heard about Rokita is that Rokita's probably going to run for a second term as Attorney General. His logic and rationale, what he's told people sort of privately, is he likes being Attorney General so much and the job is so important that to run for governor or the U.S. Senate would be sort of a step down. Now, if you believe that, I got a bridge in Alaska, in Central Alaska, I'd like to sell you. But that's sort of his logic and rationale. I would expect Rokita to run again for a second term as Attorney General.
Todd Rokita, of course, in the news this week, says he's going to appeal this ruling on the preliminary injunction, granting the preliminary injunction against Indiana's new abortion restrictions this week. That ruling made by Owen County Judge Kelsey Blake Hanlon, who is a Republican. Now, granted, this is not a final ruling. This just prevents the law from being enforced while it continues to make its way through the courts. And there was a lot of nuance, I think, to her ruling as well that has not been talked about. They've talked about, how this puts the law on hold, but there might be a lot to read into what she wrote.
Yes, and I've started reading the opinion. I'm finished reading the opinion this weekend to write a piece on it on my web blog, IndyPolitics.org. But the one thing I thought was interesting in the judge's decision was she fundamentally agreed with the ACLU's position that there is an inherent right to privacy in the Indiana Constitution, and she cited numerous examples of case law to back that up. One was a case from 1991, which I thought was crucial in all this, which basically said there's a right to bodily autonomy, and I don't know how much more you can get privacy than the decision about bodily autonomy. But this is not some liberal activist judge who makes law out of whole cloth. She was a finalist for the Court of Appeals, so that ought to tell you something right then and there. She's from Southern Indiana, so like I said, to call her a liberal progressive activist judge would be anything but true. She read the law and interpreted the law, and the decision she came up with. Now, please note, with the preliminary injunction, also another thing to keep in mind is a preliminary injunction is issued if they think you got a chance to win a full injunction. So that's something else we need to keep in mind as well.
Arielle, of course, this ruling is what Democrats are looking for in the state, and Democrats all across the country have tried to make the Dobbs decision on abortion by the U.S. Supreme Court central to the midterm campaign. Now, I guess the question is, some might say that that might not be as smart of a play in Indiana, which is a red state. And yes, abortion rights might, according to the polling, be in the majority or maybe a plurality, but perhaps not as much so as in other states, and that it might not be as smart an idea to campaign heavily on abortion rights in Indiana as opposed to, say, Illinois. I mean, name your other state. What say you?
Yeah, I mean, we're surprisingly hearing from a lot of folks when we're knocking on doors and making phone calls over this election cycle. I mean, it is an issue that they care about. Being able to have full bodily autonomy and to be able to have that privacy is something that people on all sides of the aisle here in Indiana can agree with. And I think we're seeing that in various ways. I mean, when we were in special session, Hoosiers were showing up and they were pleading with legislators and saying, majority of Hoosiers are not in favor of this. People on both sides, parties, Democrats, Republicans, everyone in between, even knew that their constituents did not agree with this, but even some of them as legislators were on the fence about what was going to happen. And unfortunately, a small few decided to make the decisions for all of us. I think that this judge and making this decision for us is a good step forward for us in the state of Indiana. It's as if we actually were being heard for the first time when it comes to Hoosiers being able to have their rights hopefully restored in the state of Indiana.
What does it say to you that this was a Republican judge who came to this ruling, obviously against the Republican supermajority and their wishes in the legislature? And let's stipulate that there was quite a bit of disagreement among that Republican supermajority during the special session as to how far these restrictions should go. Nevertheless, this law did pass easily, as was expected, and yet you have a Republican judge who seems, at least as of now, skeptical of that new law.
Right. So first of all, I will point out, that the law, like you said, right, did pass easily in both chambers. So there was majority consensus that the law should pass. The other thing I want to point out is that there was a refusal to issue a preliminary injunction prior to the effective date of the law. So that's another distinction to be made here. And finally, there was a clear point to be made by the judge who issued the opinion that the legislature does have a legitimate interest in pursuing regulation of this topic. So she acknowledged that there is space for the legislature to take action on this matter, which I do think is important. Like Abdul said, she's a judge, she's an esteemed judge. She's simply interpreting the law. I don't think there's a political angle here at all. When we talk about judges being Republicans and Democrats, that only goes so far if you're a good judge, and she is. And so I don't think this was an effort by her to make any sort of political statement toward the legislature. I think what this means is that there is an opportunity to explore the legal merits of the law. That will happen next, and we'll see what comes of the court case after that.
And one thing quick, Joe, I want to interject here. Just think about this as sort of the 30,000-foot view. You have a law that nobody wanted. The pro-life community didn't want it. The pro-choice community didn't want it. Lawmakers passed it anyway. It went to court. Now the law is on hold, and the law is probably going to be thrown out as unconstitutional at the local level. And so at the end of the day, you got a bunch of people mad. And what did you get for your trouble? Absolutely nothing. Just back to square one again.
Well, and that's even before we get to this other lawsuit that was filed in Marion County, Abdul, which argues against the law based on the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which I honestly thought that was going to be the first lawsuit filed. It ended up being the second lawsuit filed. I think a lot of people are watching and waiting to see, how a judge will interpret that.
Exactly. And another thing, too, to keep in mind with RFRA, basically saying that the government can't intrude on your religious rights or religious freedoms unless it's got a really, really good reason. Now, the folks who are anti-abortion will say, hey, protecting human life is a really good reason. But at the same time, though, you're absolutely right, my friend. It's the old line, be careful what you wish for, because you just might get it. And God has a really wicked sense of humor sometimes in the way he gives it to you.
Donald Trump, the former president, still in the news this week, in the news a lot, actually. And I would think conventional wisdom would say that is not good for Republicans, even in Indiana, where I'm not sure how big of an effect that's going to have. You had the lawsuit in New York State from the Attorney General about Donald Trump and his adult children and the Trump Organization, their business practices, allegations of fraud there, and inflating property values. You had the Federal Appeals Court, which sided with the Justice Department so they can still sift through those classified materials that were seized from Mar-a-Lago while that case moves through the court system, while that investigation goes. But one thing that did not get a lot of mainstream coverage was a rally that Donald Trump held in Ohio, Youngstown, Ohio, last weekend, which featured the usual Donald Trump speech that we've heard a lot, but at the same time, it was mixed in with some production music added by his staff that sounded quite a lot like the QAnon theme music, the QAnon nutjob conspiracy, and a whole lot of people at that speech giving the QAnon salute, raising a hand in the air or something or another while the former president was speaking. Now, Allie, this is still nominally the head of your party. And that seems to be giving discomfort to some, but at the same time, most Republicans are reluctant to say anything at all about the former president other than something complimentary right now because they're afraid of what at least some of your potential electorate might do or say, or maybe they'll go away.
Yeah, I think we're at a really interesting time with President Trump. I've said a couple times on the show before when we've talked about him, the more we talk about him, the more we facilitate his popularity with his base. I think the longer this goes on, the more investigations that occur, the more rallies he has, he's going to continue to just kind of wear his name out in the media, in my opinion. I think actually the more we talk about these things, the less relevant they become, especially when it's less of the bombshells and more of the details around the investigations. I think we're just going to see the interest in that topic continue to dwindle. I think there are going to be more Republicans that come into the spotlight as we go closer to November and closer to 2024. And I actually think that's going to take the main stage. Yes, I understand he is still technically the leader of the party. But like I said, I think what we're going to see as we approach 2024 is more names emerging and more interest growing in those other candidates.
Abdul, you think that's true? Or do you think that Donald Trump's coattails, for good or bad, are going to be there in November, even potentially in Indiana? I know we've talked about the Secretary of State's race here, Diego Morales, who at one time had things to say about the 2020 election that were not true, that he's tried to walk back. I mean, what kind of coattails does Donald Trump still carry within the party?
Well, I think I would say a plurality, not a majority of Republicans, a plurality of Republicans support Donald Trump. Now, whether the number is 35 or 40%, I think he will always have that sort of core support. And I know what you're talking about with respect to the Ohio rally, because when I see a bunch of people in front of a speaker also raising their right hands, I get a little nervous. Like, okay, is this 2022 or is this 1936? Not to equate them with Nazi references, but it's still kind of you can't ignore the parallels in what's taking place here. But I do think Donald Trump still has a plurality of Republican support, despite the New York investigation, despite the appellate court ruled against him. And the latest news now is a special judge has basically said, okay, Donald Trump, give me your reason why you tell me why you could do, show me why or how, what you declassified with the documents that were found in Mar-a-Lago. And the Trump people are saying, well, we don't want to do that because if we do that, then we'll give away our defense in case he's prosecuted criminally. At what point is it not the media, is it the candidate himself? I mean, it's like my brother who's been married 4 times. Like, dude, at what point is this you? And so I think in a nutshell, that's what it is. The issue has always been Donald Trump, and Donald Trump has gotten away with so many things for so long. I don't think Donald Trump knows how to act any differently. So you can't expect a leopard to change his spots. But I do think with people like Ron Santos, Nikki Haley, other more moderate or more mainstream Republicans, let's put it that way, I think it'll all work itself out in the end. But for right now, Donald Trump is still the head of his party.
Even those mainstream Republicans that you name, and I'm going to get into one of them here shortly, who, as you told us this week, Abdul, is moving closer to running for governor here in Indiana. But even those quote unquote mainstream, they've got a long history, and there's a long list of recordings, video, whatnot, of them siding with Donald Trump, saying things that sound like what Trump has said. I mean, Mike Braun was all set to vote against certifying the 2020 election until he changed his mind at the last minute after the January 6th insurrection, after the raid at the Capitol. I mean, there's a big paper trail of a lot of Republicans who some might consider more moderate or mainstream, of them aligning themselves with Donald Trump in the past. Does all that potentially come back to haunt them, and for how long?
I think it does in the sense. Here's a perfect analogy I like to use. And Allie, let me know if I'm crazy here. There was a famous movie about a guy who did the tightrope walk between the World Trade Centers, and he had the big balancing beam as he walked from one World Trade Center tower to the other. That's where I think a lot of the more mainstream Republicans are right now. They're the high wire balancing act, because on the one hand, you have to, like I said, 40%. Though the 40% may be crazy, there's still 40% of the voters that you're going to have to deal with and contend with. But on the other hand, you got the rest of the populace that you got to deal with as well. So for those folks, I think it's walking a very high wire act, and some folks will make it, and some folks won't.
I agree with that. And I will say that I think there's a difference between Republicans that proactively support Trump and a Trump related agenda, and Republicans that view him as the better of two evils, essentially. And I think that's where that plurality comes in. I think a really good example of somebody whose name we might see more in the media as we approach 2024, who's done a very good job of that tightrope walk that you mentioned, Abdul. And I do think that's a good analogy, is Tim Scott. Tim Scott has never come out against Donald Trump per se, but he's always done an amazing job of focusing on his own agenda and objectives. And I think as we look to people like that who may emerge closer to 2024 as leaders within our party, I think that's where we're going to see the big difference and people that others can get behind.
And by the way, Tim Scott will actually be here for the Republican fall dinner this year.
I just saw that. That's exciting news for us in Indiana.
I figured that's why Allie was bringing it up. You know, plugging there.
We'll give the little plug there. November 3rd, join us.
Now, let's delve into, I'm kind of diverting from the path here, but another Republican who might fit that mold, at least based upon what the race looks like right now, is Senator Todd Young here in Indiana. Certainly voted with the Donald Trump position a lot in his career in the Senate, but at the same time, he very publicly diverged from the Trump line when it came to January 6th, when it came to certifying the election. And I had somebody at the station who is not really into politics that much, but they actually asked me, don't we have a U.S. Senate race this year? Aren't we supposed to? Because they haven't really heard much from Senator Young's opponent in the mediums that they circulate in. That would be Tom McDermott. I was just wondering where Tom McDermott was in this campaign. It looks like Todd Young, Allie, has positioned himself very well here.
Absolutely. And Todd Young is a fantastic example of someone who has been able to walk that tightrope very well. And he does that by representing his constituency and staying true to his own beliefs. He has, yes, like you said, voted consistently with Trump in a lot of ways, but he's also diverted when he deems it appropriate. Todd Young is a smart legislator. He's a smart person. He's a person with experience. And he's a person who's gotten out around the state and met and talked with the Hoosiers that he represents. And staying true to that base has been what has made him so successful.
Somebody here at the station who's not really into politics wondered if there was or thought there was a U.S. Senate race, but hadn't heard much about it because they didn't think they had heard a whole lot from your party's nominee, Tom McDermott. It seemed like he had an uphill climb before, and it only seems like perhaps more so. Here we are less than 2 months from Election Day.
Yeah, I mean, I think, obviously there are challenges when you're running against an incumbent, as we all know. And we know that for Democrats here in Indiana, you got to try a little bit harder. But Tom has been out there. He's been getting around across the state of Indiana. And also, we should hopefully be seeing him on TV soon, too. So I wouldn't put that past anyone. He's out there doing the work. He's doing TV. He's doing the interviews. He's been traveling. with our state party. We've been doing a lot of tours across Indiana. And his message is really resonating, not only with Democrats, but with Republicans too. And we've been getting that when we have been having various town halls and meeting with other groups, not even just within the party, but outside of the party too. So while folks may think that they haven't heard of Tom, he just recently had a good Indy Star article that came out about him and his race. And I think we feel very good about Tom's chances in being able to defeat Todd Young.
Well, my wish is for us to all get back together here soon, and we'll talk some more about this, and as we get closer to Election Day, obviously, about that as well. Allie Bartlett, Arielle Brandy, Abdul Hakeem Shabazz, good to see y'all. Y'all take care.
Thank you.
You too.